So welcome to our Pan-African Reading Club, where we actually review some of the books in Africa or written by Black authors or about Africa. Our first book to do a review on from the Pan-African Library is this book called Defeating Dictator by Dr. George Aiti. And today we are getting to chapter 6. We looked at chapter 4, the modus operandi of dictators. Chapter 5, the demise of dictators. And chapter 6 is about the steering for freedom. So let's engage in this chapter and see what it has as well as we move along. When we do the reading, we always request you to critically share your thinking, because we believe that you can be able to make an informed and critical choice. So we ask you to examine the text, not to take the text wholly as it is, but examine your text, this text, and you're free to share your thoughts. Share what you think about the text. What do you want to talk about in regard to the text? Or what counter opinion do you have to what is written in this text? And what do you basically think about it? So welcome to you, Brother Kwame, Brother Coco, Brother Sister Tapo, and Brother Nixon. And to all those who will be listening to our YouTube recording, or feel free to share your comments. And also to join us on Mondays. We have moved actually to Mondays. We were initially having our sessions on Sundays, but due to competing meetings on Sundays and some people being busy, you'll move our sessions to Mondays. Therefore, I'll ask any member who is willing to read for us. We'll read the introduction and the first section on the trigger. Then once we are done with the trigger, we can share our thoughts on that. Then maybe we can look at, if time allows, we can go to the second one, the successful revolutions. So let's start the chapter from where it is. We read the whole subheading, then we share our thoughts. So anybody who's willing to read for us, you start from chapter 6, everything there, until you finish with the everything under the word trigger. Everything in that subheading. Anybody who's willing to read for us?
I will. Yes.
Yeah, please, if you can, please go ahead.
All right. Stirrings for Freedom. Quotation from Li Jibong, 2010 Nobel Peace Laureate, serving an 11-year prison term for incitement to subvert state power. And this is what he said, I'm assuming from prison. The sentence violates the Chinese Constitution and international human rights covenants. It cannot bear moral scrutiny and will not pass the test of history. I believe that my work has been just and that someday China will be a free and democratic country. I have long been aware that when an independent intellectual stands up to an autocratic state, step one towards freedom is often a step into prison. Now I'm taking that step, and true freedom is that much nearer. The next quotation is from Václav Havel, former president of the Czech Republic, and Desmond M. Tutu, Archbishop Emeritus of Cape Town, both Nobel laureates. And the quotation reads, "We have seen this story in the churches of Soweto and the theaters of Prague. We know how it ends. We are able to write today free of fear and full of hope, because our people won our freedom back. In time, Liu and the Chinese people will win their freedom." The last quotation by Mohammad Reza Shajarian, Iranian poet, in the song Language of Fire. The quotation reads, "Lay down your gun, as I hate this very abnormal shedding of blood. The gun in your hand speaks the language of fire and iron." Now we're reading the subheading, the trigger, because the topic is the stirrings of freedom. So we're looking at what the trigger is. As we saw in the previous chapter, public anger and resentment always simmer under the surface during a dictatorship. The government is dysfunctional, and basic social services such as clean water, electricity, and sanitation cannot be delivered. Commodities shortages are pervasive. The economy limps along or even contracts. It cannot provide jobs for the youth. Corruption is rampant. The few who are rich because of their political connections live ostentatiously. The gap between the rich and poor grows wide. The so-called revolution the despot instigated was a hoax. Nobody believes him anymore. People are suffering severe economic hardships, lack of jobs, high cost of living, deteriorating economic conditions. Yet the people living under despotic regimes can't complain. They're expected to heap constant praise on the dictator. It is an affront to their intelligence and an insult to their dignity. People can take this effrontery and deprecation of their dignity for only so long. Already bubbling under the surface, public anger and discontent may suddenly and spontaneously explode into full-grown rage that spills onto the streets. The trigger may be an electoral fraud, but oftentimes it has little to do with politics. A hike in the price of some essential commodity after the withdrawal of subsidy, an increase in taxes, a lack of jobs, or social destitution can ignite civil unrest. In September 2010 in Maputo, Mozambique, a 30% hike in the price of bread and other commodities sparked 3 days of rioting that claimed the lives of 13 people. More than 400 were arrested as a result. The government subsequently rescinded the price hike and promised to subsidize the price of bread so as to keep it at its original price. It also pledged to restore subsidies for electricity and water. However, it is a dead-end street for the cash-strapped government, which will soon find itself unable to pay the subsidies. In Iran faced a similar quandary. Unable to afford the 100 billion annual subsidy on fuel, water, and foods such as wheat, sugar, rice, and milk, Ahmadinejad's regime contemplated cuts. Fearful that such cuts could trigger price increases, causing further economic hardships in a country already afflicted with high inflation and widespread unemployment, top police officials sprang into action and warned of sinister foreign plots. The enemy is laying in wait to create problems, said Tehran police chief Hussein Sajedinia. We must not give them opportunity to hurt the revolution. This sentiment was echoed by another Tehran police commander, Ismail Ahmad Mogaddam. With economic pressure, they intend to push the country towards chaos, riots, and insecurity, and want to bring about civil disobedience. Close quote. Those delusional statements spoke volumes about police chiefs who were clueless about who the real enemies were, and misguided government measures. When the Iranian government placed restrictions on currency exchange in September 2010, it provoked unrest in current currency markets. About the same time, at the Tehran Bazaar, in other bazaars around the country, a strike was staged by gold traders in reaction to plans to introduce a 3% tax on gold transactions. Bazaar merchants feared the tax would skim profits. Back in July, large parts of the Tehran Bazaar had gone on strike for 12 days to protest proposed income tax increases. As the Wall Street Journal reported, a prominent textile merchant was killed when pro-government paramilitaries raided the bazaar, demanding that shopkeepers reopen for business. The Maputo riots and the Tehran strikes did not have an overt political objective, but they did inflict severe political damage. They shattered public confidence in the regime's ability to solve economic problems. Further, the riots and strikes were in open defiance of the regime and could encourage other groups, even those with a political agenda, to mount similar challenges. The brutal crackdown resulting in deaths also worked against the regime, eroding its credibility. It even created rifts amongst the ruling clerics in Iran and Mozambique. A note of caution is in order, however. By themselves, street protests and riots are not enough to bring down a dictator or effect regime change. They are necessary, but not sufficient. Necessary because all avenues for peaceful change have been blocked by the despot, but not sufficient because they do not always succeed. They may serve as the spark, but an accelerant or a catalyst is needed to finish the job. Street protests may be likened to striking a match, but unless the old wooden shed is doused with gasoline, an accelerant, the match won't raise it to the ground. A smart opposition can capitalize on the venting of public anger on the streets by managing and channeling the energy into effective regime change. But this effort has to be well thought out and carefully managed and calibrated, since street protests or strikes are often spontaneous uprisings over economic rather than political issues. Further, protesters may not necessarily ally themselves with a particular opposition party and may be focused on their own sectarian interests. Nonetheless, well-coordinated street protests can succeed in bringing down a despotic regime, as occurred in Tunisia on January 14, 2011, and in Egypt on February 11, 2011. But this can happen
only with the aid of an auxiliary agent, such as some key state institution or professional body. The following are critical state institutions that can be helpful in bringing about change: civil service, the military, police, or security forces, the judiciary, the media, the electoral commission. These institutions play vital roles in governance and constitutional rule that most people overlook. Constitutional rule requires institutional checks and balances. The judiciary ensures that the rule of law is followed by all, including the despots, civilians, and the military. Institutional checks mean that one institution can be used to fight another. For example, if the military, whose purpose is the protection of the people, seizes power, as too often occurs in developing countries, it takes another institution or professional body, not an individual person or party, to fight the military regime successfully. This is important because a military junta can, in quotation marks, eliminate an individual who poses a political threat and ban a political party, but it cannot eliminate an institution or professional body such as the civil service, the judiciary, or the media that is essential for the functioning of society. For each of these institutions to serve its function, it must be independent, meaning free from political interference, intimidation, and corruption. If institutions are independent, they can be powerful allies for the opposition or street protesters. Consider the mass street protests in Egypt in January 2011. The tide turned when, on February 1, the military announced on state television that it would not fire on the street demonstrators. The protesters had won over the institution of the military. Can we move up, please? Thank you. Oh, a bit too much. Scroll down a bit. Can we scroll down a bit? Yes, thank you. Thank you. Furthermore, the street protesters had the media, in particular Al Jazeera, on their side. By the time the Mubarak regime shut down Al Jazeera, it was too late. In the initial stages of the Egyptian revolution, the opposition political leaders were in disarray. The largest opposition group, the Muslim Brotherhood, was ambivalent about joining the street protesters. Subsequently, however, the opposition leaders coalesced around Mohammed El-Baradei, the Nobel laureate who was selected to negotiate with the Mubarak regime. The vital importance of opposition unity cannot be overemphasized. For mass street protests to succeed, they must be supported not only by opposition political leaders, but also by important professional bodies such as lawyers, doctors, judges, bankers, teachers, and students. A junta or despotic regime cannot ban and shut down the opposition of any of these professions. As we shall see shortly, a strike by well-organized professional bodies can oust a despotic regime. Since 1970, there have been more than 20 popular revolutions in the world. Some succeeded in ousting a dictator, others did not. Nearly all the successful revolutions received sympathy or aid from one key state institution or some professional body. Below, we provide a list of these successful revolutions and analyze why they succeeded. In all cases, the villains were despotic regimes, both military and civilian, and there was increasing public discontent over economic hardship, rising cost of living and unemployment, and deteriorating social conditions, rising crime, and non-delivery of basic social services, as well as anger over repression, lack of political freedom, and civil liberties.
Thank you.
Continuing? Okay,
No,
you're welcome.
I'd love to discuss. I'd love to discuss that one, Abedi, but thank you for your reading.
You're welcome.
Let's go back to where we started reading so that we can look at this text a bit. And if you think that there's something that you want to share that catch your attention, I'll be scrolling slowly. Feel free to unmute yourself and comment on anything. Is there anything you'd like to comment? Any one of us would like to comment in regards to the quotes that are shared? Anybody? These various quotes, is there anybody want to say anything in regards to those quotes?
Yeah. The first one for me is very poignant because when you find a despotic regime throwing people into prison, it actually shows that they're at the wit's end, because they actually don't know what to do with this guy anymore, except to just put them in there. Because in a lot of instances, for example, you find that they can hardly charge them with anything. We've had situations where people are imprisoned, they're taken to court, they're refused bail, they go back, their dates for the court cases are delayed. They will play the game. They use the prison as a way of trying, the last straw, trying to curb people. And it's important that this guy says it's one of the first steps to freedom, but it's a difficult step to take.
Thank you. Anybody? I'll say there's a typical example of what's going on in Uganda. I don't know whether Museveni qualified to be a dictator. But, and even what's going on in Tanzania today. First in Uganda, Museveni decided to arrest this old veteran politician who was his friend and I think a personal doctor, who is called Dr. Kizza Besigye. Kizza Besigye was arrested and taken to military camp, military prison or whatever, and they were saying because, I don't know, he was plotting to overthrow the government. Now, there are some few young men from Kenya who went to help Bobby Wine to campaign. They have disappeared. We probably believe they've been tortured. Even Bobby Wine has been tortured sometimes. In Tanzania, the key opposition leader who was shot sometimes during Magufuli's reign, during Magufuli's reign, he was shot 17 times. But lucky enough, he survived in Kenya here. He was called Tundu Lissu. He was shot 17 bullets in one rally. And he survived and he came over to hide in Kenya here. Now, recently, he was taken to court and charged with treason. And therefore, he's in prison. When Kenyans went there to stand in solidarity with them, what happened is that the Kenyans were also tortured and some also were kidnapped. In Kenya, during the Moi era, when President Moi was there, many of the dissenting voices, we call them the second liberation proponents in Kenya in the early 1980s to 92, because Moi ruled for 24 years. Of course, there was an attempt of a coup in between. But people like Raila Odinga, who is the current opposition leader, even went in jail for around 7 years without appearing in court for any judgment. So you're just going directly to jail without any judgment or any ruling. And that also happened even of recent, where one young man was taken to prison and they said that he died in prison. So I think evidence of imprisonment is also very popular in many cases. I met one of the person from Zimbabwe, Sister Tapu. I don't know if you know her. If you know him, it's called Shisekela or Shikeli. The one who was I don't know what happened. He went sometimes in the UN to seek for, I don't know, support. It's called Shisekeli.
Bob Sikale.
Shikale, who was arrested, I think, for around 500 days.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think somewhere of that sort. I met him in Kenya here when he came over.
Mhm.
And when he was explaining some conditions of imprisonment as well. And I also met the Secretary General of the union leaders in Swaziland, Dlamini. He came over also in Kenya here for a visit. And when he shared the story in Swaziland as well, there were a lot of political prisoners. We call them political prisoners. So there's been evidence of prison that's being used either unfairly or fairly by some regimes. I don't know whether they qualify to be despotic. But this is not only in Kenya. The political prisoners have been all over the continent and even the globe as well. So that's what I want to put on in regards to that comment of the first quote. But Brother Coco's hand was up. Brother Coco?
Thank you, my brother and sister, for what you've shared. I listened and followed along with Sister Zapua's reading. Thank you, Sister Zapua. That was clear, easy to follow, and helpful. But the bigger picture I had in my mind is, I thought Professor Aiti was on our side, but I don't know. Trying to read this guy closely, it doesn't feel like he's on our side. The reason I say this is, we know where the problem is. We know where the problem lies. And for an intellectual of his stature to miss that, unless maybe it's in a preceding chapters that I wasn't here, or in the following ones that he will talk about imperialism, then I will understand. But my point here is, all of these things, they are being enabled by their handlers aboard. Okay? If they are enablers aboard, don't say anything, they can do anything they want. Okay? With the exception of, again, those states which they have labeled as rogue states, right? They are rogue states that everybody knows, like Iran, like China, or anywhere where they have lost support of the West. But where the West still protects them, nobody's going to complain. Nobody's going to complain, and nobody will be protected in those states. For instance, I think he's missing a big picture here. You mentioned Uganda. I covered Uganda sometime as part of my work. Uganda is under the Museveni family. You understand? All of these institutions have been taken over by the Museveni family. So what he is suggesting here does not work, because everything is under the Museveni family, like Zimbabwe was under the Mugabe family, under Mugabe's rule. And I think now under Mnangagwa as well. There are those elites who work together or have been selected for roles because of loyalty or kinship or proximity to Mnangagwa than for their competence. So it's not really practical what he's talking about, because he should be putting pressure on the
Brother
handlers
Coco.
of these people. Yes.
Brother Coco.
Yes,
Now,
brother.
do you want to say that whatever the author is saying is false?
No, I'm saying what he's saying is not practical. Okay. He is instigating for revolution, but he has to know what is happening in all of these countries. I've just told you about the Uganda. In Uganda, there is outright repression. Nobody can do anything. The youth in Uganda tried what you guys did in Kenya, but they could not do that because you don't even know who you trust in Uganda. That's how bad it is. Because as I said, his son is a commander in the armed forces. His brother-in-law is a commander of the secret services. His wife is a minister, and then his daughter something, and his son-in-law something. So he has sort of made it very difficult for any kind of anything like this to happen. And when you look at cases like Mozambique, or where we have had, let's talk about the Arab Spring. Arab Spring happened in the Arab countries, but we don't know who supported the Arab Spring. There is a dark hand behind those uprisings. There must be some, what do they call the revolution, where it's supported by the CIA. There's a CIA involvement where you have lost favor of the West. They support the people. Is it Crimson? I can't remember the name. They use the color to show that that has been supported from outside, just like it happened in Bangladesh. Maybe in Kenya, you can say there's an exception. And in Nepal, there's an exception now. There is the media, there is the internet, there is the Gen Zs. There are lots of things that are happening now. But the institutions are under clamped down. They are being clamped down by making sure they remain under tight control of these dictators. And most of the time, if they get support from the West to continue to do what they're doing. Let's look at Cameroon right now. 92-year-old man. He's still ruling that country. You don't see the youth coming out and agitating against that. Because somebody else is supporting that. Someone else is supporting that. And he has family members, very, very close family members. He has fired the top brass in the army and replaced them with people who are loyal to him.
But the Coco.
It's probably maybe it is a different a different time. Maybe things have changed. When he wrote the book, there's that as well. It could be, but it's very hard to generalize. That is my point. Okay.
Brother Coco.
Go ahead, brother.
You are saying, Brother Coco, you are saying that what the author is proposing is not practical.
Yes,
and what the author is proposing is what I want to read in this paragraph. Now, the author is saying that street protests and riots are not enough to bring down a dictator or effect a regime change. They are necessary, but not sufficient. Necessary because all avenues for peaceful change have been blocked by the despot. And you can say what you are saying in various countries. But sufficient because they do not always succeed. They may serve, and now it's trying to refer to those street protests, that they do not always succeed. And you have said there are typical few examples that are exceptional. You are saying what happened in Nepal as exceptional cases. And he goes there to say that they may serve as the spark, but an accelerant or a catalyst is needed to finish the job. Street protests may be likened to striking a match, but unless the old wooden shed is used with gasoline and accelerant, the match won't raise it to the ground. And he says, a smart opposition, which you now can have also issues or the discussion, that a smart opposition can capitalize on the venting of public anger on the streets by managing and challenging the energy into effecting regime change. But this effort has to be well thought, that's what he's saying, and carefully managed and calibrated, since street protests and strikes are often spontaneous uprisings of economic rather than political issues. Therefore, he says, further, protesters may not necessarily all ally themselves with a particular opposition party, like what happened in Kenya, and may be focused on their own sectorial interests. And he says, nonetheless, well-coordinated protests can succeed in bringing down a despotic regime, as maybe Okadi, the example, is trying to say, but this can happen only with the aid of an auxiliary agent. And I know this auxiliary agent, as you're saying, it can be internal or external, as you have been saying, you see, such as some key state institution or even professional bodies. You say the following are very critical to support that revolution. One is the civil service, the military or the police or the security force, the judiciary, the media or electoral commissions. And he finally finalized by saying that these institutions play vital roles in governance and constitutional rule that most people overlook. Therefore, constitutional rule requires institutional checks and balance. So that's what he's trying to recommend. What is your thought on that, his recommendation?
Let's do this again. In the north of the country, which was Arab, and so the Arab Spring from 2011 that toppled dictators in Tunisia, then Egypt, and then failed miserably in Syria. You could tell that there was some liberty, there was some support for this. Okay, it happened, and we expected something to happen in our part of the West, the black part of Africa. There were riots in Senegal, but that's as far as they went. They didn't go far. And that's my point to say, there is no support. In fact, let me just not say there is. The control over those military institutions, those institutions is very tight by these guys. Very, very tight. And again, I have to emphasize, they are supported from somewhere else to do that. So the one point which I did not raise is, let's not forget where all of these institutions come from. All of these institutions are colonial institutions that are meant to support or protect the colonial master at the expense of the people, at the expense of the masses. So what he is saying here is peppering the cracks, right? He's not actually addressing the root cause, which is that we are using a false framework to rule ourselves. We cannot see ourselves in the democracy which we are now embracing so tightly. Whenever we do all of these revolutions, I wish we could come up with something which is our own. I haven't seen that happen. We just change the jockey, the horse is still the same. That's another issue. Go ahead, sister. Thank you.
Right. I totally agree with you, my brother, but we've not finished reading the chapter. If my brother Pigbin can take us to the title of the chapter, please, because I want to link the title and the subheadings. Right. The title of the chapter is Stirring for Freedom. In other words, he's saying this is just activities that is going on in places where dictators are that hint on people's desire for freedom. And he's pointing out that no matter what the dictator does, there will always be stirrings of freedom. I can't remember where it was that I read, but that there are possible things that could stir, that could trigger a change. But then he also goes on to point out possible triggers. And like the highlighted section that Brother Pigbin has read, these are possible triggers. So what we are learning is that whilst we have triggers, the despots are also looking at those same triggers because they know this is how they're going to be toppled. If we scroll down to the institutions, please. Yes, thank you. So the examples that you're talking about, my brother, the civil service, Museveni civil service, it's filled to the brim with people who support him, just like here in this country with ZANU-PF. You cannot tell the difference between government institution and ZANU-PF. The political party sits in these institutions, the military, the police, or security forces. The judiciary is captured. The media is captured. Zimbabwe is one television station, and no one else is allowed to have a television station. But with the coming of internet and all, they've lost it. The Electoral Commission is captured. So what we are learning here is an understanding of possible triggers that could help us. And as a strategist, as a Pan-Africanist, if we're going to be working towards revolution, it's not enough to agitate people in the streets. And what we're also learning from this writer is that people in despotic regimes are so oppressed to such an extent that they shy away from taking part in political riots. What is going to drive them to riot is economic, when they can't afford bread. And then we're also learning in this chapter how to take advantage of it, of the stirrings, for example, of unrest amongst the public who was so oppressed that the opposition needs to be ready to jump in. But there's also a cautionary tale that the people might not support you. Just like in Zimbabwe, we have a situation where one of the heads of the ex-combatants wanted to organize people because he can see all this corruption and so on. He called out a date for rioting, no one came out. He called out a date for demonstration, no one came out. He called out a date for stay at home, no one came. I mean, because people were saying it's the same people. And because there is no institutional support, they know that nothing is going to happen. So this is what we are learning. The next subheading, please, after this. The next subheading. Can we scroll down or up? I don't know. Pigwin? Oh.
Yes, it's a Tapua.
Right. Can we scroll down to the next subheading, please? The one we've not read. Right. So now we're talking about successful revolutions and what toppled dictators. Because Brother Coco, he's agreeing with you that things will not always work because there are some things that are extras, but we have got triggers. So even if America wanted to support someone and people are not with it, it will not happen. So this is what we are learning. And I think I agree with you, but we need to analyze the author's position from the whole chapter to the end. This is just the beginning, I think. That's my take. Thank you.
No, thank you, Sister Tapua. And I think one thing is that there is a possibility, and I think it's very crucial to understand the author, because you know what we learn in consciousness, that there's always a connection between an ideological and historical standpoint. So somebody will be influenced with their ideological point of view. But again, to some extent, what I'll call on us is let's also treat what the author says. And if it is influenced by their standpoint, we will see it. You see, when you give a drunkard to preach to the congregants, he might reach sometimes where he will forget and say that we need to either take the wine or take the beer for Holy Communion, you see. But I want us to look at the text, of course, having known the standpoint of the author, let's then criticize his writings, which means we cannot ignore him as an author, but we want also to analyze his text as a thoughts. And therefore, where we find contrary thinking in regards to what you as a person believes in, you're free to point out. Where you find somewhere where it conforms to what also you think of, you're free to point out. But if we focus or have an attention of the author's reputation, then it might also blur us a bit not to critically judge his text as well. And therefore, I want us to engage both the text with the mind of who the author is and look at what the author is talking about. So is it working? Because now here, the author is trying, when we'll be going to the following chapter, the author now wants to tell us successful revolutions. And we want to understand why he calls them successful. And whether do you think really they were successful to you? Because you see, we are not looking at the world in the same lenses. Some will look at it from this direction. There's dialectics always. So what somebody thinks successful, you might not think it's successful. And whether removal of a government is enough to call successful, you see? So I think key things that I'm taking away is that, like in my Kenyan context, the author is saying that street protest alone is not enough for a regime change. And I saw it. It happens in Kenya that we had a street protest, but did not result to any regime change. And what the author is saying that sometimes the protesters may not want also to work with particular opposition, we also saw it. So is that a weakness or is it an advantage towards the same goal, you see? So these are a few things that also we are trying to look at, and it's called them a smart opposition can capitalize. So do we have a smart opposition? And whether do our opposition really also represent the people? The opposition and government are one and the same thing. One in the waiting, one in the ruling. Like what happens in our Kenyan situation, whereby the opposition, once the election is over, jump and work with the government, and the next day come out. And people will call it that's the best government. You call it government of national unity. But where is the unity, or what's the value of unity at the expense of the welfare of the people? So I think at some extent, there are things that the author is trying to teach us. And I think this is the mistake we've been doing across the world. We did that in Tunisia, in Mozambique, in where you call it, Zimbabwe. You removed Mugabe and you call it a successful revolution. But what happened later? You removed the same thing. You see?
Revolution.
So you see, those are the few things we are trying now to learn here, that really, are we doing same thing without factoring what the end result? Are we celebrating the process without celebrating the end result? And what is our concern, you see? Because this is the evidence all over. So I'm not saying that the author might be right in his analysis or assessment, but we must also look deep whether do these things really make sense to what you're trying to do. So yes, I accept that we need to look at the author's history, but we also need to engage the text with the critical thinking whether is it wrong or right. Sister Chisomo?
Good evening. No,
Good evening, sister.
I've just been triggered by your last statement about revolutions being success, what we consider to be a success without considering the outcome or the resulting effect of it. I will always give my own country as an example. Last elections, the world was celebrating. Malawi has overcome, I don't know whether they were calling him a dictator or whatever, just because there was a second rerun. How the second rerun came about, people never investigated, never understood. They had no facts as to what led to the second rerun and how it was rerun. The president at the time let it run. He says, go do whatever you want to do. And he sat back. And the result has been so painful, very, very painful. to the extent that people said he has to come back. He had retired. He had, said, I'm not standing again. People demanded that he comes back. The party itself knew that even if they put somebody instead of him, they're going to lose the election. People did not want anybody out of the 17 people that put themselves forward. So was that a success? No. So we've gone back to the drawing board. People are more awake. People are more within that 5 years. And I keep saying to myself, that had to happen for people to learn how these things work, to learn how these people work against us, how these people manipulate us, how they oppress us. They finally got the message and they turned back to the original to say, let's start again, right? So now we've started again. As to whether that's going to be access again is questionable or debatable, or it might be a success. Maybe people, because of the lessons they've learned, they'll say to themselves, let's work together with this leader that we've brought forward to make this a success, so we're not embarrassed about our choice. I don't know. And again, we still can't dismiss his age. I personally, it will be, let me not say that. I was going to say it will be a miracle if he goes through the 5 years. And in the past, he has demonstrated he's not interested, but people kept bringing him back. So on this successful thing, without the facts, people jump because of the media, the way they manipulate the reports, the way they report to suit whatever agenda they're pushing, without actually understanding the facts of how these things came about. Because you don't live in the country, you have no clue how it happened. And also on the statement that demonstrations are not enough, they never usually bring out a successful result. That happened in my country. The last regime, without going into detail, I mean, the one that's just gone out, used a lot of demonstrations, a lot of violence. And through that, the nationals learned how to be violent. To this day, they have become very violent people. To this day, they've been practicing what they were taught in that election. So this government was very careful to make sure that there are no demonstrations in this country, given what they did last time. So their own government, they did not allow demonstrations. Okay, like you were saying, people were scared to come out because of all these things. That happened in Malawi, but they took to the social media. They took their protests to the social media. The people inside and the people in the diaspora came together. Whoever is being funded by who, we didn't care about all that. We just went for the people in our own country. We dealt with them. We spoke to them. We spoke and spoke and spoke and spoke until they were brought down. So who funded who? Our people are not that educated to even go that far. They're just looking at the person who is doing what they're seeing, and they went for them. And they did. And they've warned the people who've come in now, if you dare, we come for you too. So that's what I can say. As far as I'm concerned, this book is written as if somebody was standing in the middle of Malawi.
Thank you, Sister Chisomo. Just one thing I wanted to point out before we move to the next subheading, and if anybody want to comment on this subheading, I'm looking at the very critical institution that Dr. Eti is mentioning here, the military. And the heading says that the following are critical state institutions that can be helpful in bringing about change. Let's look at the military. And now, in the context of what is happening in Burkina Faso, that is a military state that has come in. The military has come in to bring a change. Whether you don't want to see it as a change, you want to call it a coup, you want to call it anything else, but one fundamental thing is that they have stepped in to bring a change. And it's very important that they've been mentioned here, because in the continent, we have a history of various military coups. But is it that every time the military step in, they bring a change? And the answer is not, is always no. But there are some specific times that military have come in to bring a change. And therefore, people who sometimes have judged the process that it is a dictatorial regime because it's military, sometimes also forget to analyze the end results. What is the end goal of stepping in? Did they step in for the purpose of military change, or for the purpose of a change that the country want? Or did they step in to do anything that's mentioned? So I think that's also something I wanted to highlight, that the author goes ahead to also recognize that sometimes the military might also step in to bring helpful change in a country. And that also must change our thinking that not all militaries that step in are actually dictators or destroyers. Sometimes some of them have stepped in to bring a change, like what we are witnessing in Sahel today. And I was sitting in a forum where some people were claiming, because of course I'm not from Burkina Faso, that government is dictatorial. People are being picked from the various countries where they have run out, the protesters, they're being brought back, they're being killed in Burkina, I don't know where, they're being done what and what. Of course, there will always be so many things that go on as well. I don't also defend that such government might also kill people. But the question I ask them as well, even the so-called democratic states, don't they kidnap people? Don't they kill people? Don't they arrest people? Don't they torture people? But the key thing is understanding, is the person, whether military or civilian, have they stepped in to bring a change, or have they stepped in to make the condition worse? That's a very important thing we need to ask ourselves, irrespective of which side of the institution they're coming from. Sister Tapua, and any other person who want to comment on this text before we go to the next paragraph? Sabedi?
Mine is a comment and a question, because with the Gen Z demonstrations in Kenya, I was really hopeful when the military said that they were there to, correct me if I'm wrong, that they were not going to shoot their own citizens. They're there to defend Kenya from external threat. And the leader of the country just swiftly moved in and removed him. So that possible intervention by the military was cut short because possibly all the military leaders did not agree or were scared more for their jobs. Is that correct?
Now, one element on the military of Kenya, I'll tell you, Sister Tapua, is that prior to June 2024 protest, you must remember that the Chief of Defense Forces, or the it's called the CDF, the Chief of Defense Forces, the highest ranking personnel in military, actually died in a plane crash. You remember that? It happened towards the same time the same plane was happening in Malawi.
Yes. We lost you.
Government, because he was a chief of defense force from the previous regime, and then transitioned to this regime, and he was coming from the community of the opposition leader, the Luo community. But he was one man who was loved within the military ranks and very respected. Now, when that happened, there was a change of chief of defense force. Now, the new chief of defense force, there was a division within the defense force. Some brigades, generals, and what you call them, the majors in the military, were not happy by the takeaway of their former chief of defense. And therefore, when it arrived on June 2024, the government actually ordered the release of military from the camp to join the streets. But what happened on their way to the streets, because they were never released in the street, they were then contained in one of the football pitch in the streets, in the city. So on their way to the street, the citizens were very free and outgoing with them. And they also showed the level of friendly to the citizens. And then the government actually blocked or contained the military within the stadium around the city. So they were not released purely in the street, but they, on their way to that stadium, they had interacted with the citizens on a friendly manner. Now, the government actually realized, and I think, as you are saying, it's very clear, the military actually said their work was to protect, not to kill. They mentioned something like that, you see? So, when one thing is that the process of you to release military from the camp to the street must also be approved by parliament. First thing is that the president did not seek parliamentary approval to release the military. So that release of the military was then challenged in court immediately. And the president had to call for a very late night meeting within the parliament to approve that decision. And when that decision was approved, things did not work properly as the president was thinking, and therefore he did not release them fully to the street because he realized maybe they might not protect him and rather might protect the people. And then recently the opposition leader said in one of the interviews, and then brings the element of military, is that I saw the country was almost going to the military hand. What was I to do as a statesman? I was to intervene to ensure that if you have a transition in government, let it be peaceful through the ballot rather than through military. And you see, that was a clear statement that sometimes either they think that the military might disrupt their traditional political games of how they change over, and because when military come in, there's no more of this nonsense. Or they thought that the military, as to them, will kill all what they call their democratic gains they think they have made for the country. So that is what happened in Kenya during that time. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on this text before we go to the next subheading? Because in this subheading, we are starting with this 19, actually, the last paragraph to this, the previous subheading, is what leads us to this new subheading we are going to start. And the author says that since 1970, there have been more than 20 popular revolutions in the world. Some, and they underline the word popular revolution. Some succeeded in ousting the dictator, others not. Nearly all the successful revolutions also received sympathy or aid from key institutions and some professional bodies. Now below is the list that is going to provide. But they said that both military and civilian, and there was an increasing public discontent on economic hardship. So a key thing that is almost coming up is that one of the main trigger is always economics. The economy of a country, it appears to be one of the main trigger in some of the people trying to push for regime change. And now he's talk about the deteriorating social condition as well, and also anger over repression or lack of political freedom or civil liberties. So we are going to look at what the author called successful. It's the reason why he called them successful. Then we can now critically critique what he's saying. Whether do you think he's right? What do you think is wrong? And we can also not assume a group thinking. Each individual own their own thinking. And even all of us might not agree on the same thinking direction. So you are free to share what you think is right to you or your own thoughts in this process as well. Brother Coco?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what I missed. I missed a bit. But I mentioned one thing, which is that we are continuing on the same path. I think Sister Shisomo mentioned that, and also Sister Sapua mentioned that. We are not changing anything. It's only cosmetic changes that we are doing. Well, you can argue that maybe he's saying, look for the start, look for the low-hanging fruits, and where you can make the changes, then push the levers. He's trying to show us the levers. But to me, I don't see this as a wood branch, whatever you call it, where you have to take out the root causes. The root causes are the horse we are trying to saddle here. It's a bad horse. To me, This governance which we have is really, really bad. And it's easy to manipulate. It's easy for any dictator, whether it's a new dictator we bring, when we remove the older dictator, we are still going to have the same system unless we don't change the whole machinery of government. And it's easy to manipulate. It's being manipulated from outside, being manipulated from inside. Whoever can manipulate it, they continue to do it. So why don't we learn? This is what education is about. We need to look at what is wrong and not just look at the symptoms. We are again treating symptoms here. That's number one. Number two is that what he is focused on, you could argue that maybe he's just looking at a country level, but we are Pan-Africanists. As Pan-Africanists, we need to start looking more on a continental basis. That is what we are struggling with. We need something. We need something which we can build and spread across the whole continent. So unless you are saying to me, if we get this right in Kenya, then it will spread throughout the whole continent, then I'm fine with that. But if it's not doing that, then I don't know what we are learning here. We're just going to have one country amongst many which continue to be neo-colonialist in nature. Let me stop there. Thank you.
But Brother Coco, if it cannot work in Kenya, how can it work in the continent? Because that's the key issue here. If only one country cannot be liberated, if you cannot liberate even Lesotho, how can you liberate the entire continent?
No, my brother. Don't miss the point.
No, I'm not talking about you as an individual. I'm saying, for example, look at Kenya. The Kenya is under, maybe, let me say, Ruto, with the, let me say, the Western puppets that are controlling Kenya, you see? And you have their agents here, let me say, from Europe, US, and their business people here who earn a lot of money. Now, if you're looking at liberating the continent, if it becomes very hard for even Gen Zs and their so-called protests to try even take off their so-called dictator in Kenya, as maybe what you can say, maybe the Burkina or the Sahel as management to take at a country level, the management to take out the neo-colonial power even at a country level. Now, if it becomes hard to some country of us, like for example Kenya, then what is the promise of us having the global continental scope of success, while some of us finding it even very hard to remove just a dictator at a Kenya level?
Right, can I come in, please?
Yeah, go ahead, sister, before I respond. I think you have a... Go ahead. Give the floor.
Right. Like you said, Brother Pigbin, you correctly said that we need to understand the perspective of this author, because the next section that we're reading is successful revolutions. The preceding statement before the list made me to question what he means by successful revolutions, because he says these are the successful revolutions that toppled dictators. And my question is, like Brother Coco, are we going to define the success? Are we as Pan-Africanists going to define a successful revolution as toppling a dictator? Because we're also missing here, as Pan-Africanists, what types of dictators we have and what dictators could be favorable towards the establishment of one Africa. Because if you look, for example, at the countries that have been mentioned here, particularly African countries, like professional body strike in Ghana, 1978, to what extent has Ghana been a successful revolutionary state? Because he's saying they were successful in 1978. So what has happened since? If we're talking about professional body strike in Sudan in April 1985, knowing what we know today about Sudan, this is why I'm thinking Brother Coco is thinking the way he is. Because if we look at Africa, and if we look at the revolutions that have taken place in Africa, with the idea of uniting Africa, we cannot even say changing Ruto with anybody else, if it's possible, is going to result in the unification of Africa. The example that we have of the Sahel states is an example of the direction that we need to go. First things, the democratic states that lead us to define dictatorship and the way the West defines dictatorship does not work for us. Because the frame that we are using to improve our own governance and to set up the type of government that we want in Africa, we should not even be looking at this list as an example of successful revolution. We might discuss them, we might listen to the discussion, but the question is, the point is, we're reading to learn about how we can be effective Pan-Africanists and thinking and looking at this author's perspective of what successful revolution is. I'm not sure it goes hand in hand with what we should be thinking. So once we are reading this section, we're going to read this section, but we're going to be looking at the extent to which it aligns with us as Pan-Africanists in terms of leading us to where we want to go. Like my brother Pigbin correctly said, the Gen Zs want to topple Ruto. How are they going to be able to topple to do that and lead and have that as a lead to Pan-Africanist ideal? It takes us thinking differently. It takes us looking at a model of what has worked.
Who is governing Africa
in a way that is different from what we were being given by the colonialists, because we need something different. It doesn't work. Even the definition of dictator here does not work for us. The definition of democracy does not work for us. My sister Chisomo has been giving us examples that Malawi is going back and forth, because they're realizing that there's something that doesn't quite work here. And we're hoping and believing that the 80-something-year-old is going to lead us to paradise. But is he, in the context of the Western domination of the governance structures that we've adopted? We need to do it differently. Thank you.
So I don't have anything else to add to that, what my sister said, except to say, Pigbin, we have to come here with open minds. Open minds. Some of us will support what Professor Aite is saying, or some of us will look at it and say, maybe we can improve here and there. Yeah, maybe it can be a good first step, but we need to always be in that mindset where we think bigger, we think wider, we think, can this really work? We have to be critical. We have to critically think. Critical thinking is what is required now as Pan-Africans. Thank you.
Thank you. I respect everyone's opinion. Yes, Sister Chisomo.
Yeah, no, I was interested in one of the comments by Brother Coco, which talks about manipulation. Again, going back to my country, manipulation played a bigger role. The two presidents, previous and current, have no capacity or had no capacity of becoming dictators. They just haven't got it to be even called dictators or becoming dictators because of their personality. And their parties put them there for the same reason, so they can manipulate them, especially the one who's just gone out. So they can manipulate him, so that these people who actually control the country, the system, these unelected people, including who then manipulate the political party and party members. So they can manipulate, and there was a lot of manipulation going on that people could see, and then they cast their protest vote to get these people out. But the manipulation had reached levels that even dictatorship was nothing compared to the manipulation that was going on, and much to do with, they were using money to do that at all levels. They were dishing out money. And like you people will argue, oh, money comes or sponsored by so and so and so and so. And like we said, we didn't care where the money was coming from. We were looking at the person who is holding the money, who is then manipulating us, giving us 2,000 kwacha to go and dance and make it look like this party has more crowds. So people were going to every leader in masses to go and receive this 2,000 kwacha. Some were getting 50, depending on what level you're on. And then the leaders and the people started saying, get the money, but don't vote for them. Get the money, but do not vote for them. So you found that people from this party, that party, this party, voted for this old man, but it looked like they were cheering and supporting their leader and all these other MPs. Everybody started manipulating the other. And so
Yes.
in the end, hello? Yeah,
Yes, Sister Chisone.
Yeah, so in the end, they now got the result that the people wanted, not what the political parties were or these cartels were doing. Do you know, just when they saw that the results were going up for this guy and they're not going to catch up, do you know the prices started going down? All of a sudden, petrol was in the garage, every single garage. Maize prices went down, everything. Suddenly there was maize anywhere, everywhere. Then we started hearing that there was a system of holding things. They'll get the sugar out of the shops, they'll get the petrol out of the pumps, they'll hide it and then increase the prices. They were taking Forex and taking it on black markets. The people in the country were doing that to other people just to make themselves rich. The moment government changed, instantly. So that was clear indication as to who was doing what and why. So now what they're saying is all that maize you collected to then sell it at higher prices is going to rot because you're not going to sell it anyway. So I don't know what's going to happen. So manipulation, which then results in oppressing people, treating other people like rubbish. No disregard for other people but themselves. The present leader, cousin, in-law, whoever was in that government, the whole state house was full of relatives. The first interview he's made by BBC, he's flying to United Kingdom with his family, without the foreign affairs minister, without whoever. And then in that trip, daughter stays at the embassy, becomes a diplomat. You see? But the other leader, because he was out, he's from the diaspora, he was out here for too long. He hasn't got a single family in that country. So his family was never his children or whoever. He was even married to a Caribbean woman. So the children have always remained in the States. He's the only one in the country. Now that his brother is dead, he's the only one in the country, and he never brought in family members into the government. But the people who worked with, will always bring somebody and support. So this time he's trying to be careful as how far he's going to go with it. We don't know. And also my observation is that he's already got a succession plan, because at the moment he's appointed 2 vice presidents, meaning if I step down, it's all sorted. Anyway, I wanted to emphasize on the manipulation point.
Thank you. Thank you.
Leadership.
No, thank you, comrades. I think your entire comments show some level of how conscious you are. I'll be open and honest with you that reading this book is like trying to find the solution of Africa in a Bible. It's like trying to see how we could arrive at a black Jesus or a black God in a Bible we're using today. And therefore, to my own observation, and I'll be honest, because it has taken me some time a bit to critically look at this text, is that one, the question I ask myself, is African fighting despotism as the biggest problem? Is it the problem of us as Pan-Africans? And first of all, again, it's been always the perennial question, who is a despot? And on whose term or whose definition that makes so-called a despot be a despot? And is the biggest struggle in this century of Pan-Africans just a defeating of a despot? Well, conscious Pan-Africans like ourselves know that the biggest thing we want to defeat is a neo-colonial system, which is tied with colonialism, not a despot. And therefore, as Brother Coco mentioned, and some of us have mentioned, despots are symptoms and agents of neo-colonialism, irrespective of where they are from. And therefore, we as conscious Pan-Africans know the root cause of the problem Africa is facing, where the majority who are unconscious only see the symptoms and fight the symptoms, as Brother Coco is saying. Majority of us only fight President Ruto and not fight the neo-colonial system. So I have always been asking myself, and I've always wanted to bring this forth, is it worth to read this Bible to look for a solution of Africa? Because it's very clear that the effect of education, as Nkrumah cautioned us, in consciousness, whether makes one liberal, conservative, or progressive, is very evident. And we, whom I believe majority of us are progressive Pan-Africans, cannot spend more of our time discussing a conservative or a liberal Pan-African and trying to find any solution that is progressive from their thoughts. And with that, I am of the opinion and the proposal, and it will be a very strong message that we are sending out, not out of cowardice or out of any illusion, but out to show how conscious we are and how serious we are focused, that we no longer need to read this text by Dr. George Aiti, irrespective of his academic intellectual, because we know that he is intellectual, but of a conservative or a liberal approach. And we are equally intellectuals of progressive approach. And therefore, we might only need the text that inspire our spirit to our fight and to strengthen us to the progressive journey. But we don't probably need any text that will try to discourage our spirit to make us conservatives or liberals, while we need to be progressives. And in that regard, I'll make my proposal and allow members to come in and share their thoughts. My proposal is, as I've said, to me, we've gone 6 chapters. And as I'm saying, it's like looking for a solution for Black people in this so-called New King James Bible. And out of respect, I request that if we can terminate this reading of Dr. George Aiti, and with a clear information that it doesn't align with our immediate problem. Of course, it can speak to our country's context, but we are not here to analyze country's context, because we know beyond the context each country suffer. We are not only here to discuss how Mnangagwa is a bad leader and how Ruto is a bad leader. We are here as conscious Pan-Africans to fight neocolonialism, who is actually the parent of or the sponsor of Mnangagwa. And therefore telling us that how Mnangagwa survived in power or how Ruto survives in power is actually massaging our mental thinking. And therefore I propose we stop this reading and recommend any reading before we leave this text so that we can actually move on with it, that can inspire and uplift our spirit. It's like how the believers worship to take them closer to wherever they want to go to. We need something that inspires and challenges and uplift us in the struggle we are so dedicated to fight. So that's my general thoughts, and you're free to share your thoughts, all of you who are here, so that we can see where and how do you move forward. Sister Tapua.
Thank you very much, my brother. My thoughts are, whilst you're making your proposal, reading this text has helped me understand the processes that the conservatives and the neo-colonialists use. Because if we're going to be dialectical, we need to understand who we're dealing with. We need to be very clear of the methods that are used. And for example, we were looking at how dictators use institutions here. And as a Pan-Africanist, what I've learned from just reading this chapter, although I don't agree with the author, that our way forward has to be to work with these institutions so that the institutions understand where we want to go. Because unless the institutions know where we want to go, when the ordinary person runs into the street to protest, we'll have allies within those institutions. So as far as I'm concerned, I think what we need to do is read the text to the end, but structure the questions that are going to lead us in the direction that we should go. So for example, whilst reading this chapter, we should have maybe had some guiding questions that could help us understand. Because for example, the title of the text is, can I get it right? The title of this text is Steering something, right? And if we then start talking about how we can transpose that topic to our ideals of Pan-Africanism, we'll be on our way. We're reading the first section thinking, is this going to guide us towards where we want to go? This writer is saying this is how this revolution will take place. Do we agree? Do we not agree? How can we use this information? What information can we use? So my proposal is we read to the end, but we read with direction of where we want to go, being guided by the direction. Thank you. Because we need to understand who we're dealing with. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Sister Chisomo. Sister Chisomo, what do you think?
Did I put my hand up? Or what do I think? I like the last statement that we need to be reading with a direction. Because at the end of the day, we don't have to agree with him. But he's giving us the basis for discussion to think. What exactly do we want? This book was written, what year was that? I don't know. Things have changed completely. Like I'm saying, now we are seeing that so-and-so is doing this, so-and-so is doing that. In my country, we can literally point and name them. That's why it's easy to target them. You see? So things have changed. The approach has changed, but the principle is still the same. Manipulation, dictatorship, whatever you want to call it. And the civil servants that nobody discusses are at the peak of it. They hide behind these desks, they hide behind politicians, all these ministers. The ministers come 5 years, they're gone. In my country, like I said, 5 years is enough. They go, and then we bring in another lot. They go, we bring in, but these guys are still there. So when these guys come in, they are ready with their cash to give them in association with the Asian community, the whoever's. Money is waiting. The minister comes in your department,
So,
you give him.
Sister Chisomo,
Hello?
Sister Chisomo,
Hi.
so you propose that we read the text but with guidance as proposed by Sister Tapua?
Yes, we have to have our own direction. That's how this Pan-African thing is
Okay.
about. What do we want? Where do we want to go? How do we get there? Who
Okay.
is stopping us? Identify who is stopping us. Like I'm saying in my country, we can point to them, we can name them. In fact, the names are all over social media. The moment your name comes up, you know you're targeted.
Okay.
We must stop.
Let me hear what Brother Kokoso thinks. Brother Koko, what do you think?
Thanks, my brother. I was laughing here, couldn't control myself in the way you explain about the Bible. It is, because you see what we are happening here, what we are doing here is more or less what Dr. Nkuma said to us. We have to have an Afrocentric history. We should not start with the Eurocentric point of view as our starting point. We have to have a bit of an interaction with the Europeans, but our whole history should not be determined by that interaction with the Europeans. So I like the fact that we took a book from someone who is not at all radical, progressive, and read that, and learned from that, and used our brains to critically assess, analyze, and look at that text and say, does this make sense? Is there something we can pick from it? Is there something we can just throw away? It just says we are maturing as Pan-Africanists. We can take any text, read it, but take what is useful to us and throw away everything else. So you don't have to rush into saying, let's get rid of this altogether. What we can do is to continue to stimulate our minds to think deeper. It's sort of helpful in a way. We are moving away from our teacher, who is Dr. Nkuma on Thursdays, and looking at other people to say, okay, what is different between what Dr. Nkuma was saying and maybe his countrymen, someone else who is educated in the West too. And you can see the difference there, that this one, he took the colonial education to heart and thought it's the best thing since sliced bread. Whereas Nkumas looked through it, which is what we are doing right now. We are looking through it and saying, no, you cannot fool us. You cannot pull the wool over our eyes. You can't. This is not how it works. So the bottom line is, I don't know how long it will go, but it's good for us to critically examine any text that we get. We can go, as my sisters are proposing, continue reading it, but if it's not helping us, then we can throw it away. I think what we are learning here, we are seeing, as Sister Tapua and I think Sister Shoma said, we are looking at how we can work with the institutions, for instance, how we can start thinking about all of those stuff that he is using, but in a Pan-African sense, not in a neo-colonialist basis that he is coming for. And two more things before I step off is that we have to realize that the dictators, the African dictators, they are just a distraction. They are using them as just a distraction. So we don't get to the real problem. We should never ever forget who the real enemy is. But our brother, may he rest in power, he is one of those who got sold a pup and thought I have a solution here. But this is not it. It's not the solution. The solution is bigger than that. We can topple those dictators, but we should always be thinking wider, thinking about the man on the street, Pigbin, the one who cannot eat because his resources are being used by a colonial company or being exploited by whoever the elites are in that country. Because the system enables that. We should always be thinking wider, deeper, and critically. I hope that I'm clear.
Thank you. I've actually just highlighted what you said from Brother Nkrumah's side, which I'll speak to at least a bit on what he said on the history. But yes, thank you for also supporting what the previous sisters have also said. I think you are moving in the same direction. Brother Ifo, you've been here for an hour. What do you think? I know Brother Sawindo
I was going to say, Brother Ifo hasn't said anything.
Yeah, I'm coming to him. Brother Ifo, what do you think?
Okay, I am of conflicting minds. So part of me says, eat the meat and spit out the bones is a saying that an old man used to tell me back in the 90s, which basically means you take that nurtures you and you spit out the rest. So that's the way I look at this text, as in understanding of some things, but also being cautious because some of it will definitely not be helpful. So with that analysis, I'm okay with it. Then my other mind says, looking at revolutionary texts from people like Amilcar Cabral or Kwame Ture, mostly because of, as the previous speaker said, talking about, grounding ourselves in Pan-African thought. But that being said, I think that there are lots of our confused brethren who might be more familiar with the line of thinking that's in this text. So it might be important for us to be able to reason out our critique of this as we move through. So that's why I say I'm of two minds. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
No, it's accepted. Dialectics is accepted, and I think that's what they say. They have the left brain and the right brain, and they don't think the same way all the time. Sawindo, you've joined us a bit late. We are almost winding up, but having looked at the text for some time, I know you've been part of our class. It's reached a moment where we are asking ourselves, is really the text helping us to solve the problem of Africa, or is the text actually trying to massage us to what you call the current situation in Africa? Because one is, you've been also raising the key question, who is the dictators, on whose hand or whose lenses? So I've been thinking, for example, and what I was proposing, having read Dr. Iti's book is trying to find the solution for our salvation of Africans in the Bible. Because it is written with some ideological standpoint. And therefore, I was asking the question, do we need to continue reading this text by Dr. Iti, or do we need to overhaul it and read something else? What do you think, Sawindo? I know you've been here for various sessions. Okay, you propose that we pass. Now, comrades, you have, according to the majority, is that also sometimes, what I also agree, is the doctrine for domination. And if we want to free ourselves from that domination, we must also learn the tactics for domination.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for us to get rid, and in fact, most of the people who have been very good revolutionaries are good experts in the spiritual text, or the so-called religious text. They know what Islamic talks about. They know what Christianity talks about. And that's why people like Malcolm X, having understood the text in Islam, could still find some few texts that could inspire him to fight for what is right, contrary to what majority were doing. That's why people like Marcus Mosiah Garvey could still find some few texts in Bible that did not stop him from pushing forward the Pan-African struggle. And that's why guys like Akina Kwame Nkrumah, who even studied theology before studying history, philosophy, had some reasons. So I don't know what I'm hearing from majority of us is that, can we study these so-called peoples who are actually the problem of Africa, but with an intention and a very clear observation that we know who is behind them. We know who is behind the symptoms. But you're trying to learn, because before we conquer who is behind Ruto, we must also defeat Ruto in the process. So either this text provide us the reason on analysis of who Ruto is, so that we can also access who is behind them, and then you propose that let's read it, let's analyze it, let's pick some few lessons we can pick from it, but let's never turn or change our direction to the direction of the author. Let's keep our true north and use our true north to analyze the text and also to find anything that is relevant to our true north. Is that what I'm hearing? Sister Tapua?
Thank you. Yes. The most important thing for me is it's almost like strategizing for battle. You've got to know who your enemy is. You have to know the strategies they use. You have to understand how they see you, so that you can then come up with your own strategy to take the war to them and go the direction that you want to go. So for us to be successful Pan-Africanists, we must understand neocolonialism. We must understand the tactics that they've used and the tactics that they continue to use. And if we understand those, and if we understand, for example, how they captured the institutions that we've just been talking about, then what that tells us is that our strategy has to be a deeper understanding of how these institutions work and how they've been embedded in our own systems and have been used to put our systems aside. Because it's not simple. The question that we're challenging these systems, a lot of people get nervous because they'll say, what are we going to use? So my position would be, after reading such a text, we then need to look at practical things that we can do when guided by a Pan-Africanist text. In other words, we're not just going to read any one of the famous Pan-Africanists for the sake of it. We're saying, what are we going to do in this generation, in this time? What is it that we can do? For example, today we've learned that we've got these institutions that are used. People demonstrate, yes, because of economic situation. So what we're learning is we have to have our ears to the ground. We have to know that we are the opposition in waiting, and we need to strategize to make sure that when a crisis happens, we know we have people within those institutions who are going to stand with us and support us to go where we're going. So action for me is important. We need to read with action in mind. Thank you.
So thank you all, comrades. And with that, we will continue with our reading on successful revolutions in our next study next Monday. Let's look at how they're being described or what qualifies them to be successful. And let's share our thoughts in regards to what we think about that, as we've been doing, and what can we learn to make our true Pan-African successful revolution. Having said that, permit me to thank you all for this evening, and let's meet again next Monday.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye.